welcome to my January wrap-up of 2025. I finished 5 books. Let's go. I had already filled out all of these pages before I hit record, so here's just an overview of everything I watched. I watched a couple of TV series and movies. I now have a movie subscription. Those are some of the songs I listen to. I'm not sure if you can read this very well, but you can pause the video and zoom in if you want to see it a bit more clearly. So then we're getting into the actual reading journal. I ticked off 5 books because that's what I read. I was able to already fill out a couple of letters of the alphabet here with some of the books I read. I think at the start of the year, that's going to be very easy for me to sort of go through. Nothing for my TBR, but I was able to color in some of the books on the bookshelf. I haven't filled out my book bracket yet because I think I may actually be able to finish another book before the month is out. Then we get to the bingo. I crossed off the novella and a book set in a Victorian setting. Then here is my little genre tracker. I ended up reading 1 fantasy book, 1 literary fiction book, 2 nonfiction books, and 1 romance. And in total, I read close to 1,500 pages. I read almost every single day, so that's good. And we still have a couple of days in the month left. I read 2 physical copies. I read 2 audiobooks and 1 ebook. I was able to read 1 book for my diversity tracker, 1 male author, and 4 of them were by female authors. Here is the genre again, but then with colors. And these are my ratings. I actually read a 5-star book, which is great. I read 1 series, I didn't buy any new books, and I didn't read any classics. So for moving on to the next page, here I just have my stats with my pages and the number of books, the different genres I read. I didn't buy any new books, the TBR, and just some other things I just already shared. And here's my little book overview where I have all of the titles and like my star ratings for each one of them. And I will be using this in a second to fill out all of the different reviews and to sort of list it in my little overview of covers, which is what we're doing now. So I will be speeding you through this because else it's just going to take too long. I'm using little stickers here that I printed out with my HP Sprocket. So that's why you're only seeing 4 books in this wrap-up review for now, because I found out that in order to be able to make that sprocket thing work well, I can only print out 4 covers at the same time. So instead of doing 5 books after I finished 5 books, I need to update you guys on my reading every 4 books. So I now know that. So moving forward, there will be 4 book reviews. And here I've just printed all those covers on sticker paper, and I'm just adding my star rating underneath of the different covers of the books I've read. And I will just be having my 5th book in my next overview for you guys, because I don't think that will make much of a difference. But what I've decided to do is to do a little bit of junk journaling for each one of my little book reviews here. So I'm just setting up the page here. The first book I read was actually Ben Aaronovitch's Masquerades of Spring. This is a novella in the Peter Grand series, which is a series I really enjoy. It's urban fantasy about a police constable called Peter Grand, and he finds out about magic and doing all of those things. You see me flipping back and forth here sometimes to check some of the stats, so I get some of the information right. And I just used a star-shaped hole punch to get the little stars out so I can stick my little rating there next to the actual review. This book is really enjoyable. It is a novella, so it does center around another main character in the Peter Grand series, so it's not featuring Peter Grand. It's actually a spin-off with Nightingale, who is one of the other main characters. He's Peter Grand's mentor in the main series, and this is set in 1920s New York. The story isn't told from Nightingale's perspective, and I feel that that was the main letdown. I still gave it 3 stars, so it was still very enjoyable for me, but this wasn't the kind of thing where I really feel like I totally enjoyed it left, right, and center. It was fun. It's about a missing saxophone that has magical powers that they're trying to find in sort of jazz age bootleg America, which is a lot of fun. Our main character is also part of the LGBTQ plus society. So he is in a relationship as well with a man, which of course in that day and age was very much frowned upon. So we're getting definitely a different perspective. And our main character, I forget his name because it's a very sort of, I don't know, it's an obnoxious name to say. And he actually went to school with Nightingale, moved to New York a couple of years ago, and Nightingale is on this mission to find this saxophone. And together they embark on this journey to find this saxophone. The main downside for me to this story and why I didn't like it anymore, because most of the books in this series were 5-star reads for me, is because I just didn't really enjoy this character's perspective. He was very much an onlooker and not really part of the figuring out of what was going on or what they were trying to do. So he was just standing around and observing all the time, and he wasn't really part of the action until the very end of the book. It was only 165 pages, I believe, so it was a short book to begin with. It wasn't enjoyable, yes, for sure. It was definitely enjoyable, and it was definitely a thing where I'm like, it had great potential. I liked learning more about this Nightingale character that I knew from the original stories, but it wasn't something that I loved enough to say, this is something I'm going to enjoy reading again. I just didn't think this main character that we got the perspective from was all that interesting. And, he was just a bit of a frivolous dandy for the most part. So that's why. And you're just seeing me putting the little pages together here as well. So I went with the theme of like masquerades of spring. So some spring flowers and like cocktails and wine glasses because there's alcohol around, even though, of course, it's they go to speakeasies and stuff like that. And for the dandy sort of part of it, I went with the pocket watch and the butterflies there because there is sort of like a, like the Masquerade of Spring title refers to almost like a drag ball that they go to towards the end of the novel, which I thought was an interesting twist. So the world was good. The characters were a bit underdeveloped, I found. So that's why I didn't enjoy this anymore. So let's move on to the next one. This next book is actually a Dutch book, which I listened to on audio. It's by Rinke Verkerk, and the book is called Het Hele Dorp Wist. In English, the title is The Entire Village Knew, and this is a very harrowing nonfiction, truly happened story where she has actually investigated a sexual abuse case that happened in her town when she was a teenager to a girl of her age who lived in a village over, but they kind of went to school together, so they knew of each other. And it explores the entire tale of how the sexual abuse could have happened to this woman by now, girl at the time, and how the societal structures in these villages sort of made it almost possible for it to happen to her, because as it turns out, as you're listening to the story, her mother and her sisters had also been sexually abused by the same person. It was her granddad, and he had actually already been convicted of sexual abuse for abusing, I think it was a girl who worked as his secretary, as well as his daughters, a lot earlier on, when the girl who the story centers around was only, I think, 3, maybe 5 years old. So she knew something was up with granddad, but she didn't really know what. And because nobody was talking about it, and everybody was just sort of like going back to normal, and it therefore really focuses on the bystander effect when these kind of things happened, and sort of how the people acted who found out about these things, but also how the other victims in the story either helped or didn't help the progress of the main victim that the story focuses on. So this was actually something that happened for real. The names have been changed for privacy reasons, but this was one of the, while it was like really, really sad and harrowing and a very sort of dark story, these are things, of course, that happen in real life. So it was also a very important story, I found, to get this perspective of knowing more so what's going on. Like, there is this entire thing about like blaming the victim, and that's definitely happening in this retelling as well. But the journalist has interviewed all these people from like brothers and people who were in the church who found out about things and why were things accepted and all that. So it was a truly investigative work of how this family coped with it, how she coped with it, how people responded to her when it first happened, who she told, how that person ended up responding, but also the sort of aftermath. So once the granddad is convicted yet again, like how do people in the village actually perceive this girl, and like does she make any friends, and how does she deal with that? So it's much more, it's not so much about the abuse itself, it's much more the effects that it has on the sort of immediate society that all these people live in, and then especially the main victim that the book focuses on is sort of giving that. So it is very sad, but it's one of the most important things I've ever listened to, because there were so many things in place because people just looked the other way that actually enabled the entire situation that it happened to her again like it did to her mother before. So that's why I gave it 4 star. It was incredibly well done. And therefore, I think a book that if you do read Dutch, because I don't think this was translated, I think it's a really good one. The next book I finished was a book I actually read on paper. This was a nonfiction story that I had for such a long time. I believe I picked it up years ago when I was in London, and I gave this 5 stars, as you can see here. It's The Five by Hallie Rubenhold, I think the author is called. I always get her name wrong. And this is a nonfiction historical investigation of the lives of the 5 women who were murdered by Jack the Ripper. So there's a lot of Jack the Ripper lore out there, and what this author was surprised by was that it was never about these victims. It was never about the women. It was always about the gruesomeness of the murders and how clever this murderer should have been in order to be able to get away with it, sort of. But this historian has actually figured out like who these women were, where they came from, why they were in East London to begin with, like how did they end up here, and how did they end up in a situation that allowed them to be murdered. And I thought this was so well done. It's a really good deep dive into the role of women in Victorian England. It is also a book that tells a lot about sort of Victorian society, things that were deemed normal at the time, but also some of the hardships that a lot of people faced because there wasn't much of a social security system going on. So what happened if people died? What happened if you ended up on the street? What happened if your husband cheated on you? And all 5 of these women have such harrowing stories behind them, from human trafficking to forced prostitution to husbands who walk out on them, domestic violence, addictions. Like, they were really dealing with really tough issues, and because there just was no safety net at the time, they sort of ended up where they ended up going to, and that sadly led them to have them be put in the way of this murderer. The murders themselves aren't described in this story, and the aim of the historian is to sort of take the narrative further than these women were prostitutes, so they deserved it, because that was something that the newspapers at the time did a lot, because these women were found in an area where prostitution was sort of like a regular thing. These women therefore must have been prostitutes, and therefore they kind of like had it coming. That's been the narrative for a very long time, and this author is really trying to elevate these women, show that they were much more than that. So even if they did end up going into prostitution because they simply saw no other way, because there was no other way for them sometimes to make money even, the only woman out of the 5 who actually worked as a prostitute for a longer period of time prior to being murdered was only one of them. The other ones all started off life in a very different way, and some of them just ended up on the bad side of life through sometimes no fault, but people in their environment not knowing what to do with them. Maybe they had mental health issues that were misunderstood at the time, but also just the hardships of 19th century England, which was rife with disease and accidents and people just dying left, right, and center. So that's what happened to them. This was really well done. I really enjoyed it. It was very easy to read as well. And that's why I gave it 5 stars. One of the most important books, again, that I've ever read. The final book I'm reviewing here for you today is the Cinnamon Bun Bookstore by Laurie Gilmore, and this was the other audiobook I listened to. This was only 2 stars. I quite enjoyed the first book in this series, which was the Pumpkin Spice Cafe that I liked. That's about Janie, who moves from Boston into Dream Harbor, which is where the books are set. And of course, she falls in love, whatever. It's a romance. There's not that much to it. But that was still really enjoyable because she was a newbie in town. She still needed to get to know all these other people in this town. And that's why I really ended up enjoying it. But with this, I just didn't like it as much because that backstory just wasn't there. It was just our 2 main characters, one male, one female, who are just lusting after each other the entire time. It had a lot of like, I want you, I want you, I want you, and it didn't really go beyond that. The girl is described as being the typical nerdy bookworm who doesn't go out much, and the male love interest is a rugged fisherman who's like running away from his problems. So it felt very tropey to me, because it went from I think we are friendly to each other to I want you, I want you, I want you the entire time. I felt there was very little build up in the chemistry between these 2 characters as well. I didn't feel it. I just didn't really enjoy their sort of playing off each other. I just didn't really find they suited each other. It really didn't come together for me. So it was still enjoyable. I ended up listening to the whole thing, but I would not recommend this to anyone really because I don't love these kind of romance stories. These are the kind of romance stories where I'm like, too simplistic. I could see it coming from a mile away. There was an attempt at an interesting subplot, but because of the way it was written down and how simplistic the plot was in the end, it was just far too predictable, and that's why I didn't love this one as much as I had expected. And that leaves me with finishing off this video. This is how I would like to do my wrap-ups in the future, to sort of put these pages together and to do a little bit of journaling as I'm also writing the reviews into this little booklet, so that by the end of the year I have all of my reviews nicely in one place, and just talking you through it as we're going along. So I hope you enjoy this new style of the way I would like to do my wrap-ups moving forward. This way I just get to be a little bit more creative and like putting everything together. And yeah, for me, this, I hope, really works. Like I said, I'm going to have to do this in groups of 4 moving forward, and then I will try to do my best to also film me filling out some of the other character categories in this journal. I thought I had pressed record, and apparently I hadn't. So that's why I ended up just like filming this for the main part, and showing you it that way. So I hope you enjoyed watching this video today. I will be coming back with this style of video again soon whenever I read another 4 books. As I already mentioned, I finished another one. If you're curious what my 5th book is, it is Christina Henry's The House That Horror Built, but I'll give you my full review of that one in my next video. And the book I've actually already started is Crescent City by Sarah J. Maas, which is the first book in the House of Earth and Blood. That's a bigger one, and because I'm now on a roll, like I've already read 5 books, and the month isn't even over yet, So I do feel I'm right on track to be reading something a little bit bulkier. I was going to read this book over the Christmas break period, but I didn't manage to. And I've also started another audiobook again. So I'm actually listening to, what am I listening to again? I have completely forgotten. It's a nonfiction by Amanda Montell again. I listened to another one of her books last year and quite enjoyed it. So there will be more bookish content to come for sure. I'm going to be back again with a new video next week. See you then. Bye bye.